Unlocking healing and transformation with plant medicines. My name is Nata. I am, easily put, a guide, kind of lightly, loosely holding this word of being a healer, but I'm a holistic facilitator of transformation and embodiment, and I support people that are navigating transformation and transition in their life, which seems to be everyone these days. And so that's just a little bit about me. I specialize in, yes, I work with plant medicines. That is a tool of one of the tools that I use. I also work with astrology, trauma healing, and different ancient modalities in supporting anything from entity attachments to ancestral healing and karmic ties, finding deeper meaning and purpose through astrology and the North Node and weaving that wisdom. Psychedelics and plant medicines are a staple in the work that I do. Thank you for tuning in and for enjoying this presentation. Everything that I'm sharing is for educational purposes. I'm not here to give you health advice or tell you what to do. I'm sharing soulfully from my own research studies and embodiment through this work. This is not medical advice. So in this first little portion, we're going to talk about, I just kind of shared a little bit, maybe talk a little bit more about my journey, how I got to this plant medicine world, why so many are choosing this path right now, and how I could support their healing, their transformation, or even their creativity. The meaning-making crisis we're experiencing globally. And liminal phases, what are liminal phases, transitions, and the theory of transitions, and why psychedelics were banned before we jump into what psychedelics are, but why they were banned in the first place, which I think is so important to understand before you hop into this work or maybe heal your own stories around psychedelics. What guided me to plant and fungi medicines? This is a synopsis. I am a mother and I was going through a huge identity crisis. I was going through my own healing and transformation, as well as a spontaneous Kundalini awakening. Over the last 15 years, I was really going through this deep understanding of who I am, the suffering that I was carrying along with me that was so heavy and so something I really couldn't speak to, but just felt it and felt this like heavy world of like depression and like just knowing that also that it wasn't mine, And then in my 30s, after having my two kids, I became bedridden. I had diagnosis after diagnosis, but always knew that I didn't want to go this medical pharmaceutical route. My grandmother was a healer and a medicine woman. That was one part passed to my DNA, as well as the trauma that was passed to my DNA. My work was around ancestral healing my cute stories. I refer to cute stories a lot in my work, that we carry so many cute stories, our own belief systems, what's been programmed into us, and how this is actually blocking the feminine and masculine energy, which is what we refer to in most places, the yin and yang, or Shiva and Shakti, the dark and the light, because oftentimes we want to like hide the darkness, but really it's like, how do we integrate that dance? And that was a huge part of my journey, craving that deeper connection. I always wanted deeper connection and freedom and liberty, and I didn't even know what that was. I had to find that within myself, my body, my being, and my own embodiment, as well as show up for my kids without projecting this trauma drama onto them, which seemed to have been like really wanting to be released from my body. That brought me deeper into plant medicines, working with ayahuasca. And my staple medicine, of course, is the sacred medicine of psilocybin, the mushrooms. And from that, that's really led me into hosting and supporting women through deeper transformation, through festivals, through self-stewardship, and of course, plant medicines journeys, which I take with a very deep honor, knowing this is a rite of passage and there is a sacred responsibility when working with these medicines. And that's why I put together these presentations so that we can go deeper, understand and learn about the neuroscience and the bridging of this medicine, but also how to use it in its most effective ways. So the next part is, why are so many turning to the path of plant and fungi medicines? I'll share a quote with you that I really love by Stanislav Grof and Christina Grof, who is a psychiatrist and principal developer of transpersonal psychology. Don said, "People feel that their sense of identity is breaking down. Their old values no longer hold true, and the very ground beneath their personal realities is radically shifting." Even if you just sit with that, like how much of that is true for you? What transformation and transition are you going through, right? Through your work, your family, your relationships, through your body, your relationship with your body, your spiritual, mental, and we're going to get into more of that. But so much of that, these identity constructs are shifting and breaking down. And we're going to see more of that happening as we go through a tremendous amount of shifts. Stan also said that psychedelics would be the study of the mind as the telescope was for astronomy, or the microscope was for biology. And that's really beautiful if you think about that. So this is the study of the mind. And I'll get into the breakdown of psychedelics later, which might blow your mind. As we know, the planet is moving through a meaning-making crisis. We see this in our streets, in our schools, globally, if you watch the news. Old stories are no longer working. There is a breakdown, a reconstruction happening. As someone who loves astrology as a powerful tool, we see many astrological shifts, which I won't cover in this one. That's a whole other presentation. But there are so many shifts happening astrologically that haven't happened in hundreds of years, some for 15 years, some for 3 years. Anytime we see these big shifts, and even when the nodes shift, people are shifting. Something is shifting. People are going through awakenings. AI infiltration and technology acceleration is a huge reason for the meaning-making crisis. After COVID, there was a huge awakening, a huge wake-up calls. So as I was saying, AI infiltration is happening. We're going through an expansion versus a collapse, right? And that's what we also have to remember here. As institutions, belief systems, and identities are not soul aligned, they're falling through the cracks. And this is why so many are like, oh my God, because all of that is dissolving. All the illusions are dissolving, which means we're expanding. Consciousness is expanding. And so in that widening of the lens, this is where psychedelics can really help to widen the lens, which I'll get into as well. More people are questioning authority. More people are questioning even how do I heal trauma? And what have I been carrying along with me? And how can I reclaim my intuition and allow this new earth kind of, we refer to this new earth energies rooted in sovereignty and integrity. How do we rise as integral leaders in our communities and homes, within our families? In essence, humanity is not losing meaning. It's being forced to recreate it. So deconstructing false identities is one, but also building new identities with AI coming. A lot of people are like, oh my God, what am I going to do? Many are going to lose their jobs. Many are just searching for their own soul kind of identities. And this is leaving us in a liminal space. So we're going to cover liminal spaces and phases right now. So this is, like I like to refer to as crossing the river of change, and understanding transition is important right now. What is a liminal space? A liminal space is a threshold. It's a space in between what was and what is yet to come. It's like in between two worlds, and it's a transitional state. And it oftentimes is rooted in a lot of uncertainty, transformation, and also potential, okay? So it's a gap between two worlds. It's a crossing of a threshold, a space of transition, and when we're meeting ourselves at this brink of change. And maybe that's why you're tuning into here. Maybe that's your curiosity about psychedelics, about healing and transformation. These are some examples of liminal spaces. The liminal space is between waking and sleeping. Right when you're about to wake up but you're still sleeping, that's a liminal space. Career changes, moving homes or countries, cities, states, provinces, breakups, divorce, or uncoupling. This is a liminal space. Health diagnoses, going on a healing journey, a new identity, a paradigm shift, your highest self calling you in, like the north node versus the south node. That's a very liminal space to be in. Death of a loved one, right? These are all liminal spaces. Weather transitioning, moving into winter, into the water phase of the elements. That's the liminal space, right? And a lot happens in these liminal spaces. Graduation, your kids leaving home, dream states, psychedelic states. It's a liminal space, right? Self-transcendence, a place between your decisions when you're making a big decision. Should I sell my home? Should I move here? These are all liminal spaces. And uncertainty of where you currently are to where you're going next. That's a transition that we're all going to experience probably for the rest of our lives, right? Because everything is liminal. Everything is impermanent. We're constantly changing, much like nature. And so this is where psychedelics, because it's also a liminal space, right? When we're in that in between the two worlds, this is where we can learn how to be with the uncomfortableness of not knowing. How comfortable can we be while we regulate our nervous systems and learn to be in this liminal? This is why it is such a big scene right now, if used to the highest integrity, in my opinion. So Sarah Lewis, who's an anthropologist, a really amazing author as well, she says that the function of a liminal space is to deconstruct one's former identity. This is a place of repatterning. It is the most uncomfortable space to be in, but it's also that really expansive place to be in. Oftentimes people feel like this is like the state of chaos, and I'm going to explain the state of chaos too, which is interesting. So the transition theory was developed by Arnold van Gennep in the 60s. He talks about his rites of passage model and crossing these thresholds. He says all transitions go through 3 phases, this theory. So which is also really important to understand, like, cool, like where am I in this transition? And he stated that the first phase of transition is a separation phase, a phase of letting go of the familiar and moving to the unfamiliar. Whether it's a role, a relationship, an identity, a diagnosis, a belief system, this is oftentimes marked by feelings of loss or uncertainty, right? That's like this beginning state. Then we move into a liminal phase, which is the in-between, right? This is where like even those states that I shared and the medicine space as well, and how this ties in, I'll show you. This is the old identity when it's being dissolved, but the new hasn't really fully emerged yet because we actually don't know what that next version of ourselves is pulling us towards. And so this space is often characterized by ambiguity and exploration. It's also referred to as the crisis phase. It's a lot of disruption, uncertainty, suspension of structure, but this is also where we don't want to blow up our whole life. When we're in this liminal, we want to learn how to work with the flow, and we'll talk about that as well. The incorporation phase, which I like to refer to, and my mentor taught me as the reintegration phase. I call this in my work the embodiment phase. How do we embody the wisdom of the medicines, of the vision of the future of who we're becoming, letting go of that old identity, bowing at the altar, because it's not like you're shaming or blaming the old or the dark. We're learning how to leave it and reintegrate ourselves back into life with this new social identity, this new inner standing of who we're becoming in this transition can oftentimes be this really whole big awakening in an individual's life. So those are 3 transitions, and maybe you kind of want to note down where you are in this, or maybe you're just kind of in limbo where you're already integrated past another phase that you just went through. This is the hero's journey. It's been around since the 60s, Joseph Campbell's work, and it ties into psychedelics. It ties also into my integration framework where, there's this call to adventure. We come into this supernatural aid. We want to cross this threshold. Here's the known, but the unknown is down here. When we're crossing this threshold, even with medicine work, and why it's so important in the integration phase, which I'll explain, is where we really need the help and the mentors. Because what happens is we can hit these really low crisis states when we're in that liminal. Even when people are like, oh, it's like, I feel like I'm in chaos. When we break down the word chaos, the actual etymology of chaos is the gaping void. We're in this gaping void of expansion. And maybe it's like feeling really dark, but this is actually where we have those really big revelations or that birth and rebirth. That can also happen in medicine spaces depending on the dosage. That is a part of some of the pillars for transformation, and how can we be embodied with the wisdom, right? And that really, there is aspects and components to this and how we can really work through that. I'll incorporate here a little bit of the medicine wheel teachings on how I support individuals going through this process. What I feel is the return in this new identity, how we can be anchored and rooted in that expansion. He talks about the separation, the descent, the liminal phase, the psychedelics as a catalyst. And that's me adding our twist on psychedelics here. How we encounter with source, right? What is our connection to source? Are we aligned with our, earth-based practices? Are we trust? Do we have faith and trust into the universe, God? This simple return to self and shifting beyond. Carl Jung had a beautiful quote: "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." A huge staple in any work that we do when we're working through transition, dis-ease, some sort of transformation, is really honoring the darkness and not trying to hide it or suppress it or pretend it wasn't there, but that is a component of the yin and the yang, the light and the dark, the feminine and the masculine, and learning how to embrace that. And I really appreciate this quote, because even in medicine ceremony, if we have darker images or something coming out, there's always ways to weave this where we're also finding the silver lining in all of the teachings that are coming our way. So I believe it's not about erasing the wounds nor pushing them back down into the dark. It is about integrating them and learning to dance with the shadow, how we move our bodies. Are we moving through the ancestral trauma? Are we allowing the space within our bodies? Or are we just holding and binding and becoming restricted in who we are? It is a reclamation when we work with powerful models in terms of integration models and scaffolding of what we can do in these medicine spaces when we're utilizing neuroplasticity, which we're going to get into. Before we take our little pause here, the big question was that many ask, why were psychedelics banned in the first place? And now you can see that they are coming more and more online. There is a tremendous amount of research on psychedelics, and we already know Big Pharma wants to take that. I like to keep what I was quoted as being underground. I work with deeply shamanic, anchored, rooted practices, because when I look at earth-based, that was before any religion, before any pharmaceutical company came in. We were attuned to the elements and working with the elements. I will jump into why this was banned. I really love Terence McKenna, y'all. If you haven't looked him up, he's really amazing. He was a key pillar here in the psychedelic community. He was an ethnobotanist and a mystic who advocated for the responsible use of psychedelic plants. He says, psychedelics are illegal not because a loving government is concerned that you may jump off a third-story window. Psychedelics are illegal because they dissolve opinion structures and culturally laid down models of behavior and information processing. They open you up to the possibility that everything you know is wrong. That's Terence McKenna. So a couple of reasons here when the big ban happened. So the threat to social order and government control happened during the 1960s when there was a huge movement in the LSD world. And that was actually in the 50s. And it became deeply intertwined to the counterculture movement and the anti-war protests and civil rights activism. It was actually infiltrated by the CIA, and you can look it up. It's the MK Ultra movement. Ironically, this was released before criminalizing psychedelics. The CIA heavily experimented with them through the Project MK Ultra, which was a top secret in the 1950s to the 1970s. They thought they could use it for mind control, interrogation, psychological warfare, destabilizing enemies, and behavioral modification. But it kind of blew up in their face. Instead of making people more controllable, it expanded their consciousness. And then their little movement turned into like this big peace, love, and like, let's make love and like no war. And that really, of course, pissed off the governments. That was Nixon's war on drugs, a big political tool used back in the 70s. They stopped all research. So there was phenomenal research, there's phenomenal documentaries you can watch on YouTube and Gaia explaining more of this. So this war on drugs was then like Schedule 1, substances are, illegal, they're going to fry your... And they had this big campaign that all parents bought into, every single parent bought into this campaign because it was everywhere. This is your brain on drugs, and they fry an egg. That literally is everybody who would refer to those times would remember that and how they made this the worst thing that could ever happen. Such a beautiful medicine that came to help people and really did empower a lot of people, and then they shut it down. Now it was for the suppression of consciousness and expansion and natural healing. We live in a very profit and for dependency kind of world where they profit on you being on meds and conform and hold a fear. It's all about control. This is institutions like Johns Hopkins, the MAPS organization, Imperial College, validating the indigenous cultures and early researchers what they knew all along. These presentations remind us this was and is a sacred plant medicine used for transformation and healing. So as psychedelics reemerge into the mainstream consciousness, pharmaceutical industries are watching closely, eager to patent control and commercialize what was never meant to be owned. That's already happening. We've covered a little bit about my journey, why so many are choosing this path, the meaning-making crisis. There's a great documentary if you want to learn more about the meaning-making crisis. His name is John Vervaeke, and he talks about the meaning-making crisis, how we can also expand, and liminal phases, and why psychedelics were banned. I'm going to pause here because I kind of want to get a pulse check. There's a lot of information. There is a whole other chapter we're going to get through next. Does anybody have any questions from this point on?
No questions in the chat.
Cool. So now we're going to talk about transformation and healing, the medicine wheel, interoceptive awareness, why it's important. We'll talk a little bit about studies, the indigenous wisdom, what are psychedelics, neuroscience behind psychedelics and how they work in the body, safety and toxicity comparison, contraindications, and are psychedelics for everyone? And that ties into setting and the matrix. Maybe you haven't heard that part, and it's not the matrix. I'll explain it. And then, of course, what does a ceremony day look like? And my really short pitch for you all. So here we go. Healing and transformation. I like to always touch on statistics because it also makes me reflect on why I'm doing this work, because this work is really not easy. And it's not something I chose. It's something I was really pulled into on my own path and my own healing. So it's something I do honor. But I also should reference that I didn't really choose this path. In the United States, about 45% of people have at least one chronic disease. In Canada, it's 45.1 had at least one major chronic disease. And I was one of those people, like I was diagnosed with connective tissue disease. I thought I had lupus. I had fibromyalgia, polycystic ovarian disease, depression. If I would have kept going to doctors, they would have just kept tacking things on. I got that vibe and decided to go my own route. So in the United States, about 6 in 10 people have at least one chronic disease. 4 in 10 have 2 or more. That's a lot. Not to mention how many pills they're on and the side effects of those pills. These numbers are expected to increase, and they probably already have since I've done this. In 2024, the United States is projected to have over 2 million new cancer cases and 611,000 cancer deaths. This is near and dear to me because I've had many people in my life that have transitioned because of cancer. Canada is lower, but we are much smaller. 247,000 new cancer cases and 88,000 cancer deaths. I always like to ask, what does healing and transformation mean to me? Why is it important? What is it stopping me from doing if I am desiring to change and create more for my life, for my well-being, at least have more energy throughout my day, sleep better, have better relations? And what was the root cause or conflict that may have influenced my dis-ease, right? I like to say dis-ease because it's ease, it's not ease in the body. So it's like a dis-ease. And what emotions or feelings need to be acknowledged and processed. So these are always internal questions we can ask ourselves. I'll break this down, and there's different ways, but the medicine wheel has been a really beautiful teacher in my life. Our Western medicine is just like, you have this symptom, and this symptom is not related to anything. No emotions are related. I just didn't really understand how they could you have connective tissue disease, but nobody told me how I got that, how I can heal it. Like, there was such a blockage in what I was seeing, and somebody who was always studying holistics, I had to go deeper. And when I went into this teaching of the medicine wheel, we're on Indigenous lands. That means we also should be tuning into the Indigenous teachings of the lands we're on, because there is wisdom and power there. So, of course, the spiritual body, the physical body, the emotional body, and the mental body, which we're not really addressing. We're typically addressing the physical body, and that's it. And what happens to all of this, biosocial, psychosocial model is the wheel of well-being. I incorporate this into all my work and in my teachings, because we're not just our physical body, right? But it is diet, it is exercise, it's biochemical, it's the physiological systems, it's how we feel in our body, it's the stories that we have around our body, the flexibility, the balance, right? So it just goes way beyond this really surface level. And then there's the social health and relating. So love, service, relationships, these are the core human needs. We need these aspects too. We need to be touched. We need community. We need sisterhood and brotherhood. And then there's the mental component, right? We are in a mental health crisis right now, likely tied into the meaning-making crisis that everyone's trying to make of their life and everything that's binding us in different ways. And then, of course, there's spiritual health. When I work in psychedelic ceremonies, it's very spiritual, earth-based practices. How much belief do we have in our own culture, connection to God, and faith that everything is unfolding exactly how it should be? So that higher purpose and self-transcendence is ultimately why, when we look at the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, is why how we really transcend and to live a fruitful life. And then, of course, the emotional health, which is a huge component to how we carry dis-ease in our body and disfulfillment, our own inner world, the coping mechanisms, how we speak to ourselves, the attitude, the beliefs, the outlook of the world that we hold. It can be very narrow, right? In the first 7 years of our lives, we get this program of the lens of how we see the world. And that could be very narrow depending on the parents, the upbringing, the societal programs that we're receiving, right? So that can be really hard if you're trying to heal or if you're trying to not to repeat patterns and ancestral stuff. How do we widen that lens? This is why psychedelics come in, right? I'll touch more about that. That would be like narrow lens versus larger lens. A question I like to ask myself, am I in right relationship with all aspects of my life, with all aspects of this component, right? Am I in right relationship with myself, with others, my family? Then there's Louise Hayes' approach. She was one of the first people I found to make sense of the dis-ease that I was feeling. She has a book called You Can Heal Your Life, or You Can Heal Your Body. She believed that illness is a manifestation of unhealed emotions, negative beliefs, and suppressed traumas. I can resonate with that because a lot of the stuff hidden in my body was repressed trauma that I had blocked in my psyche. And it all came out after a medicine ceremony where I could actually bring it to the light, heal it, and then my pain started going away. I appreciated her work as a foundation starting point. And then I got deeper into things like German New Medicine, quantum physics, healing, radionics, scalar therapy. And German New Medicine has a belief that every disease, including cancer, originates from an unresolved emotional conflict. It's a shock on the body that happens. And that is a response to emotional trauma, and it manifests as physical symptoms. Any symptom that we're feeling in our body, we can actually go through their process and, where and how that is impacting us and shows up in our body. So I believe that these are core teachings we can tap into when traversing our own healing. Healing to me is truly about alchemy. It's about turning the pain into wisdom and the wounds into portals of transformation. But oftentimes that doesn't happen. We actually hold on to the trauma. It lives in our body. It stagnates. We get stiff. We get hurt. We get pain. We get dis-ease. And then that grows. But if we start to acknowledge where that originated from, what we're holding, whose story was that, what stories do I keep repeating, and really sit with it, which takes a lot of courage. This path takes a lot of courage, but I'm seeding this because psychedelics are a tool of healing and transformation and creativity. However, it's what we end up doing with it. And are we able to transcend the old version of ourselves, right? So it's how we're utilizing these medicines. And that is with self-awareness, which is essential for healing and transformation. And I'll tell you why I'm bringing up self-awareness. And when we're aware of our senses, and just so you know, as we all know, or being reminded, our senses were actually, they came out because our interoceptive awareness because of survival, right? Our ancestors lived for survival. Am I going to have food? Am I going to be attacked in the middle of the night? So that is actually how we are rooted, is in survival. We're not necessarily rooted to thrive. The default always is survival, hypervigilance. And depending on our upbringing, depending on our ancestry, was there war? Were they fighting? Were they moving? This is all going to play a role in how we move forward, right? In the understanding of our own well-being and what we've been carrying and amongst the world around us, right? So the interoceptive awareness is the ability to sense, interpret, and acknowledge what's happening inside of our body. It includes noticing your internal sensations, your emotions, and your movements. And as soon as we start to have those awarenesses, then we can view them. We can see like, oh, who does that belong to? And we can do this parts work where we're pulling it apart and we're seeing it. This is where psychedelics really come in, because psychedelics heighten our interoceptive awareness. Poor interoceptive awareness is linked to anxiety, depression, PTSD, emotional dysregulation, eating disorders, addiction, suicide, and trauma disorders. Low interoceptive awareness. The dampened awareness is when people have depression. The heightened, like the over awareness, is when we have anxiety, right? And so our mission here, and when we're working with these medicines, is how do we find the balance? How do we find the balance from the two worlds here? I mentioned this, our brains are wired in survival, not necessarily for thriving. For those of you, maybe you've already studied this or heard of this, but the critical periods are from the age of 1 to 7. This is where we receive our hardwired programs, which is kind of scary because then it makes me feel like a shitty parent sometimes. But again, we have the tools. This is where we receive the programs, and this is the lens that we get. So now we have to look at, what was my upbringing like? What were the stories around upbringing? What was the stories around money? How about love? How about society? How about school? And we got to look at all that. And then we have to look at our cultural society that we were raised in and all the stories around that. That was all being programmed in our psyche. Here's a really cool study that psychedelics showed. We can actually reopen the critical periods, which is so magical. That will help us to rewire and work on new plasticity so that we can come out of that survival and hardwire new behaviors, new ways of being, new belief systems. Psilocybin triggers an activity-dependent rewiring in a large-scale cortical network. That means psilocybin doesn't just alter your brain activity, it changes the brain's structural connectivity at a large scale. I'm going to show you a picture of what it's doing. These changes are network specific rather than uniform. Some pathways get strengthened while others get weakened. This can also weaken and dampen the stories and the ego and allow this new transition to rewire, to widen our consciousness. And this suggests that psilocybin engages activity-dependent plasticity, which is neuroplasticity, meaning only circuits that are active during the psychedelic experience are remodeled. So this is where we can be more specific in ceremony space, especially if you're working one-on-one. Then we can get more specific to those specific time periods, past life stuff, like younger life stuff, and then really work on those circuits to create a new story and hardwire. So we're going to get more creative even in these psychedelic ceremonies. By quieting the mind, which is what neuroscience refers to the story of me. It's the story that you actually have of yourself, which is 99% of the times really distorted. So we're able to gain deeper insights, expand our lens of seeing the world, and come up with creative solutions to our questions, including how to heal our bodies, what are the next steps forward, and how to truly befriend ourselves on this path. All spiritual teachings are teaching us to befriend ourselves on this path. Here we have spotlight consciousness. This is kind of like the consciousness we receive in those first critical periods. And what psychedelics do, they open up that consciousness and allow us to come into this lantern consciousness, widening our periphery. When we're using meditation, vagus nerve stimulation, and nervous system regulation, we can widen this and allow ourselves to look, even how my body is talking about it, my body becomes more open. My heart becomes more open. I become more authentic. I become more rooted in who I am. So you bring in those other wisdom teachings to keep us anchored. I really love this analogy. It's a great way to look at what psychedelics are doing. In many indigenous and earth-based traditions, healing is not an isolated journey. It is relational. We do healing community. This is why I do circles, why sitting in circle, why having a sacred fire, why working with the elements is so important. And this is something pharmaceuticals will never be able to take from earth-based traditions. Also, the importance of working with intuitive guidance and holding this space, giving the space to reflect, honor, share, and to be seen and witnessed in that change. The Aztecs referred to these sacred mushrooms, the mushrooms that I personally work with, as the flesh of the gods. The flesh of the gods. Which is pretty wild, and historians suggest that the Aztec spiritual leaders used these hallucinogens to induce a change of state of awareness, going to liminal space, being in between two worlds, and believing it enabled communication with their gods and other spiritual entities. Maria Sabina is one of the first indigenous women to share about these fungi medicines. Oh, here she is. And she was a Mazatec. She didn't speak any Spanish. She spoke her native tongue. And she was then, she was a poet. She never took any of the poetry as her own. She said that this was channeled through her Niños Santos, was what she called the holy children that she spoke with through these medicines. And she was able to heal entire towns and people from the United States. And in the 50s, of course, the Americans got word and really came in to her healing ceremonies. And that's when the floodgates opened and the doctors started pouring in for this sacred medicine, which was pros and cons at that time. That also distorted her whole entire community. They really labeled her, and she had to go underground for a long time. But the medicine work never stopped. She always continued to share her medicine. Suffering is the portal to liberation, according to the Buddhists. Through our own suffering, we can come to the light and know thyself to heal thyself, to allow ourselves to be, this anchor for other people on this path. I mention imagination because, it does take an imagination to become who you're becoming or to have that end-all outcome, to leave the old status quo. We need imagination to bridge us. It's an important tool to allow ourselves to dream, who we're unbecoming to become. And you see, psychedelics support the widening, as I mentioned, of outdated narratives and help us open pathways to creative solutions and allows the ego, which we'll talk about, and how that dampens, allowing us to access more of our imagination. That's what psychedelics do. It allows that childlike state to come out, which is our most fruitful. Psychedelic. Here's the breakdown of psychedelics. I love etymology. Psyche, the first part of the word psychedelic, is the human spirit or mind. And then delos is clear or manifest. When you put the word together, mind manifesting. So we have the spirit, which is the mind, and then clear seeing, mind manifesting. I really love that interpretation of it. Psychedelics are referred to as entheogens. Entheogen is like your connection to God. They are psychoactive substances and they produce alterations in conscious experience. This includes cognition, perception, feelings, and emotions. There's so many names for psychedelics, so many names. Ideogen, inspirogens, sacred plant medicines, hallucinogens, visionary plants, psychoplastogens, mind expanders, plant allies, spirit allies, and the list goes on and on and on. These are the common ones. And again, if you want to take screenshots, that's probably the easiest because I won't be able to go through everything in detail just to honor the time here. So psilocybin is the main one. Most of the research happening right now is with psilocybin and LSD. And it's usually around a gram and up. There's not a lot of information on microdosing. There is more anecdotal research on that, and so people sharing their stories, which is really great too. We shouldn't dismiss that either at all. So the fungi, psilocybin is being studied as its ability to treat depression, anxiety, PTSD, addiction, and it's promoting, as we talked about, and we'll talk more about neuroplasticity and deep emotional healing. LSD is a synthetic, right? I personally don't work with synthetics. I have tried some, but I tried to stay to the natural ones. That's what my guidance was, and to stay in the pure light. So known for expanding consciousness, enhancing creativity. It helps with alcoholism, cluster headaches, and mental health disorders. DMT, dimethyltryptamine, this is including ayahuasca. It's found in various plants and used in shamanic traditions, especially in ayahuasca. It's probably the main one, the main brew. DMT is also a more intense mystical experience. It's very, very deep. It's not like a low mushroom dose. This is very deep and you're in portals and dimensions. It's very powerful, and to work with a really experienced practitioner or shaman. MDMA, ecstasy or Molly. This is a heart opener. This is also used for relationship healing, PTSD. Sometimes it's paired with mushrooms as well. and it's great for emotional processing of trauma. What I experienced, my own experiences with MDMA in ceremony, that you can actually access those parts in the trauma that you experience and actually leave with a heart open versus in resentment, shame, blame, and guilt. It opens you to a wider lens. There's mescaline, peyote, or San Pedro, and we were asked not to use these by the indigenous folks because it does take a tremendous long time to grow this cactus plant, around 25 to 30 years. And then, of course, there's ketamine. It's not actually a psychedelic. It is just widely used as a psychedelic. It's actually a dissociate, and it's rapid acting for antidepressant. I've done a really deep ceremony in a medical kind of state on IV. And for me, it was the false light. It actually messed up my stomach tremendously. It was really weird. So I don't have a great experience. I had a good experience, but definitely shown that this is not the medicine for me or what I would validate as a psychedelic. Neuroscience. So the easiest way, and I love this analogy, is like, what does psychedelics do to the brain? Imagine a snow globe and imagine you shake it, right? And this is like your brain. Now, when all the little snowflakes land, there's like a clear path. There's no paths that were carved in. And that's what psychedelics are actually doing. It's disrupting these patterns and giving you fresh tracks, almost like a train track moving through, right? So the phenomenon is called neuroplasticity, which I'll get into. And so what they're doing, they're disrupting this pattern to meet the demand of the external disruption. Think about fear loops when you're in fight or flight, which is the default mode, survival, fight or flight, freeze. Even when you get creatively blocked in your business, when you're like, oh, I just have no new ideas, we get into these looping, ruminating, I'm not good enough, whatever kind of fear-mongering stories. There's a lot of that around us. So anytime you read that or hear it, fear, that's all being programmed into your psyche. With our own loops of fear around healing, we have to look at like what are our stories around healing, transformation, creativity, change, all these transitions that we're going through, and what are the stories that we rooted ourselves in. And Dr. Manesh Gurn, who I had the pleasure of studying under, says entrenched beliefs. If you look at the brain, there's all these ridges, like a walnut, and that's where our entrenched beliefs actually live in these trenches of the brain. And the harder, so these beliefs, like the more permanent they, like if you had really hard ingrained beliefs around religion, how you need to be, how you need to show up, how you need to dress, and how you need to, whatever it is, it's being so like potently programmed into your brain, becomes really much harder to disrupt. When you work with psychedelics, it's disrupting that automatically. This is a very popular image. It's a study done by Robin Carhart-Harris, one of the leading researchers, and he did this in 2014. 2014, that's a long time ago. And this is like a lot now just coming now into this window. This is a sober brain, and this is your brain on psilocybin. And it's look at all the connectivity. This is increased connectivity, suggesting enhanced information sharing and blurred distinctions between functions. So what that means and why that's so exciting is that with heightened connectivity in the brain, this is where we can have and program new behaviors, new thought patterns, perspectives can emerge, new ways of perceiving the world or ourselves, our own being, our own body, right? And so this is that widen, that lantern consciousness that's happening. And like learning comes back online, digestion comes back online, and I'll come into the role of serotonin. Remember, we are hardwired for survival, but we can rewire that. There's a lot of fear that we're moving through right now. The more you respond to fear, self-sabotaging loops, patterns, the more that becomes a neural pathway that's reinforced in us. So that's also mindfulness, is where we can observe what we're taking in and holding it in our brain as truth. So the brain learns through repetition. If you're constantly telling yourself, I'm unhealthy, I'm going to die, or I can't have this, or I'm not worthy of that, this is being rewired into your brain as the truth. But if we're practicing these practices, we're working in a powerful integration model, we can actually hardwire this and excel and quantum leap. This is what they're talking about, quantum leaping, quantum leap these timelines and pattern new connectivity. This was also a really great study on psilocybin-induced decreased amygdala reactivity, and it correlates with enhanced positive mood in healthy volunteers. So psychedelics downregulate the amygdala, so it reduces your fear. If you're in a lot of fear all the time, this is actually getting dampened in a psychedelic state, which is amazing. You can see from a different lens, right? It's loosening rigid fear-based thinking, anxiety, overthinking, looping. This is why it's helping with things like depression, PTSD, eating disorders, right? It's creating more emotional resilience, so less reactive states, and allows us to reframe trauma without being overwhelmed by it, which is also very important when it comes to healing and transformation. Trauma is big T, small t, it's there, and how we're feeding it is how it's growing. So if we can learn how to work with it, then we're already working in a higher dimensional timeline. Insights involve transformative realization or reframing of a problem. Often by breaking out of habitual patterns of thought, it enables individuals to see through illusions or misunderstandings and into a deeper understanding of reality and oneself. Stan Grof talks about these being non-specific amplifiers. So if you had these feelings or unconscious material that's been kind of hidden, it can bring those up to surface, right? Typically more big in ayahuasca ceremonies versus gentle mushroom ceremonies as a starting point. This is just an image showing that neuroplasticity in the brain. So this is where we're connecting. So this is literally their science showing this. I like to throw it in here because I think it's really beautiful to see. So to get specific on how it's working in the brain, psychedelics affect the serotonin and specifically the 5-HT2A receptor. There are 13 serotonin receptors, but specifically that one is affected the most. The activity is in the brain is a default mode network. It's dampened, it's quietened, as well as the amygdala. And the default mode network, a lot of people it's very complex. It's not that easy to explain. I'm not a scientist or a doctor. However, it is more easily defined as like your ego, how you make decisions in your life, a lens, right? So that's what's getting dampened, right? When we talk about neuroscience, what's happening in there. The transmission of glutamate, which is responsible for cognition, okay, which is really important, and increased thought, increased throughout the brain. This neurotransmitter plays a major role in shaping learning and memory. From my own experience, I always thought I was a slow learner. When I was microdosing, I started to rewire those programs and started to write books and do all these things because I was actually firing and wiring new neurons. And the brain has over 1 billion brain cells, neurons. So think about that and how the connectivity is happening in the brain, how we can work with it. Serotonin is also, it's not just like everybody thinks it's about the feel good, but it's not just that. It is cognition, the way we think, the way we feel. The stress hormone, the neuroplasticity, sleeping, eating, thermal regulation, memory, processing, like vomiting, is controlled by serotonin in the body. When you have low serotonin, you're more likely to have depression and anxiety kind of feels. And so when we're working with psychedelics, it's actually enhancing this naturally. Where something like an antidepressant, SSRI, serotonin uptake inhibitor, it's actually blocking the receptor that produces its own serotonin and putting artificial serotonin in the body, which is kind of counterproductive, right? Whereas when you take a psychedelic, even if you're microdosing it, it's sending this pulse and reminding it how to communicate to each other, and it's producing its own serotonin. Your body's producing its own serotonin because we're magical, okay? 90-95% of the body's serotonin is produced in the gut. So this is why nutrition matters. This is why probiotics can help. Antibiotics can harm. Reflex drugs can harm us. GI infections can harm us. Acupuncture can help us. Breath work can help us. Cold plunging can help us. PMF therapy can help us. Nature can help us to regulate the stress and to find how to be balanced versus harming our gut. As I mentioned, the glutamate is very much affected, and this is a profound effect on glutamate signaling in the brain. Interaction with glutamate is a key factor to cognitive, emotional, and neuroplastic effects. If you want to do a screenshot, this is a little bit of how it's heightened and what it's increasing. So do take a snapshot if you want to go there. If you look here's serotonin. I love this image. Serotonin, yay, happy. And then look at psilocybin. So chemically, how similar they are. And there's DMT, boom, similar. Look, it's all how similar they are. This LSD is more complex. It's actually adding on, but just simply how similar they are in their structures. I think it's a great little image of that. I'm going to read this really powerful quote by Dr. Robin Carhart Harris. We have shown in the first clear changes in brain activity in depressed people treated with psilocybin after failing to respond to conventional treatments, which many people are actually failing. Several of our patients described feeling reset after the treatment and often used computer analogies. For example, one said that he felt like his brain had been defragged, like a computer hard drive. Another said he felt rebooted. Psilocybin may be giving these individuals the temporary kickstart they need to break out of their depressive states, and these imaging results support a reset analogy. similar to brain effects seen in electroconvulsive therapy. So what he's saying is that it's temporary. But what we're doing after is so important, right? That's why integration models, working in integration models is so important after, because there is a window of heightened connectivity, which is about 2 to 3 weeks, according to research, that we really want to use this scaffolding of regulating our nervous system, finding balance, working through consciousness, and working through these models, which is all rooted in a program that I've created to work with the scaffolding. This is an image of a brain in the depressive state, and then how it gets lit up by psilocybin, which is really beautiful. So it's reconnecting. Contraindications, there are some. Please don't skip through this. This is really important to have a really strict process. This is by application only. I don't work with just anybody. Pre-existing mental health conditions, especially if it runs in the family, like psychosis, schizophrenia, severe mental health disorders, although they are widely misdiagnosed here in the West, oftentimes it is a Kundalini awakening that most people are going through, and then they're, diagnosed as bipolar and all kinds of stuff because they don't have the wisdom of the East, or they haven't integrated it fully yet. SSRIs, especially lithium-based SSRI, the antidepressants. In my intake, there's a website. If you are taking any medications, you can put it into this portal and it will give you a report if it's safe for you to be journeying. There's much more science being released. Also, it can open you up to a spiritual awakening. I have to mention that as well. It's really important to know that. Spiritual awakenings like Kundalini awakening, this is where you're going to need definitely to work with someone who's gone through a similar process, because it can be very chaotic. Learning how to ground this energy is also important. It can put you into spiritual awakening. There's lots of information coming out that many women are breastfeeding and using psychedelics during this. Many indigenous cultures drink ayahuasca through their pregnancies and all this. So again, to each their own. There's more studies coming out, more anecdotal stuff being shared. I wish I would have known about microdosing after, because it would have helped with my postpartum depression. But now I know, and now I can share about it. So it is just also to do your own research and tap into what feels right and aligned for you. Allergies, if you have allergies, it's good to test it in a micro before going to a bigger dose. So those are the contraindications. Are they safe? There has been no deaths related. I know someone who took 40 grams of mushrooms, which is, I would never, ever say that this is anything you should ever do. But there's no fatal overdoses recorded from pure psilocybin. When you look at psilocybin compared to caffeine, alcohol, aspirin, heroin, nicotine, LSD, the lowest two on this entire spreadsheet is LSD and psilocybin. Please screenshot this. Do your own research. Go into it. Nicotine, extremely high toxicity. Heroin, very high toxicity. Aspirin, moderately high, but potentially fatal in overdose and liver stomach risks. Alcohol, common causes of overdose and long-term liver damage, liver cirrhosis, huge problem, as well as caffeine, and fatal in large concentrated doses. But I really love this because it's just like, look at how low this is and what you're getting in the serotonin surge, neuroplasticity, rewiring, and how important it is for you to even let go of toxic behaviors if you are going to use these medicines. They're very gentle on the body and working with your dose. I wouldn't recommend doing any heroic doses. There's a space to learn how to hold yourself, how to regulate your nervous system so you can get more access points with the medicines. And that's something you can work up to in your own integration in your own work, as well as with these medicines, if this is a calling for you, or if you just want to use it for a one-time and disrupt a pattern and really allow yourself to anchor this new timeline. This is also super beneficial and really supportive for healing any kind of addiction, sugar, relationships, drugs, alcohol. Why is it a double-edged sword? And I believe in our culture, we don't actually talk about the not so great things about psychedelics and where they are misused. In our conscious communities and even indigenous cultures, we return to a matrix. We can have this amazing experience and have open light if we come home to a toxicity, if we're self-sabotaging, if we're looping in old behaviors. We've now utilized this to reboot and to grow neuroplasticity. And then we're going to do what? This is why it's a double-edged sword, right? What are we going to do with this? If we're anchored in using the scaffolding and working integration and really working on our belief systems and how we really want to change and anchoring that vision of the future of who we're becoming, or are we going back and eating Doritos and drinking alcohol, doom scrolling on social media and comparing ourselves to people that will never be and talking all this shit about ourselves? That's why it's a double-edged sword. So what I would say, if you are contemplating to use these medicines, use them as a medicine, use them as a rite of passage so you can really transform your life and grow from it. I've seen people dive into 47 ayahuasca ceremonies and have done nothing in their life and are still looping in the same behaviors, but they're having a really cool experience. It's not just about this really cool experience. Yes, it's a component where you're really opening up and seeing this gaping void that we're a fractal of nothing in this galaxy. But again, what are we utilizing it for? Are we honoring the sacred responsibility of what we are accessing and what is being shown to us, the wisdom? That's where I really think this presentation is so important, is so we understand that these are sacred medicines and to use them with care and to witness what you're doing after, especially in those 3-week windows, right? It's okay if you haven't been using them properly. You're like, oh my God, it's not about making yourself bad or wrong about it. It's about now disrupting the pattern and really working in a scaffolding that's going to support who you wish to become. I hope that is really, there you go. So what are you firing and wiring together after ceremony? That is the big question. Integration, like I said, 2 weeks post, the most important. Setting matrix. This is your mindset going into a ceremony, the setting of the environment. This is the very sacred place. You don't want to be, taking this and going into Kensington Market for your first time and being like, what am I doing? Because it's going to enhance all of these entities around you. And that could be a bad trip. But if you're in a setting, working with someone in this shamanic realm who can hold this space for you, you can go deep and understand and work with these realms. It's important to have that really nurturing, nourishing setting. The matrix is also something we don't talk about too much, but it is understanding the energetics of someone coming into a ceremony. Are they supported when they're going back? What level of consciousness are they working under? What are the ancestral imprints? This is why I dive into the astrology and understanding, like, what are your karmas that you're having in this lifetime? What are your most toughest lessons, which is usually Saturn in your chart. This is where I love to weave the wisdom of the modalities that I work with, because it's all supporting what we're actually working towards and who we're unbecoming. And then, of course, the beyond is the ineffable. It's our deep communion with spirit, our connection to nature, our connection to ourselves, connection to individuals around us, and this higher intelligence, right? And how do we continue to open to our higher intelligence? That's why integration and nervous system regulation is so important. Ceremony day, for those of you who are interested in a ceremony journey within, I made this really cute little roadmap of how it looks, because it's a common question, like, what does a ceremony look like and how does that feel? Depending if you're traveling in pairs, or solo, or a group setting. I do group monthly ceremonies, usually small, 5 to 7, depending on the space. So there's an arrival, it's very gentle music playing, super zen kind of vibes. You have your journal, there's an online portal that guides you through the intention setting questions. We have an integration call before you come to ceremony. Then you come to ceremony. We do grounding where you feel super calm. The space is calm. Your space holder is grounded and calm no matter what happens in ceremony. The point of our holding the space for you is to be grounded in our nervous system, whole in our heart, and really rooted in integrity here. It's typically served in cacao. That also opens the heart, right? It's taking this natural medicine to open the heart. Then we do some grounding and breath techniques to really drop us in. The medicine starts to work, and we're eye covers, we're laying down, and the music is playing, and you're in your own individual ceremony. Depending on the dosing, we're in ceremony anywhere between 4 to 7 hours, depending on, again, the dosing. And then after that, then we're doing some integration. It's very quiet. You're journaling, being with it, silence. You can move around the space. And then we have sharing and integration circle. And then it's time to go home. We have 2 integration calls, one within a couple days after, and then 1 in 2 weeks to have accountability for anything that we've said that we're going to work through. And there is an online portal that I've created that has everything broken down for you, what to bring, how to go through it. It's really beautiful. I've put a lot of love into this, as it is a staple of my work and a deep honoring to hold this space. Everything is built into the back end portal, which is through Thinkific. From integration, for preparation questions, integration, how to prepare after, everything you need to know, everything is built into the back end so you can have everything answered. And then we do our integration calls, and there's deeper coaching, deeper offerings to get you to where you would like to be. Group offerings start at $555. That's including the preparation, the portal, and the 2 integration calls. I keep my prices so that everyone can enjoy in this offering, work through this portal, work through the integration. It's really potent to do the journaling prompts. There is one-on-one also. You'll get the same portal or small group. You can organize your own small groups, have one-on-one, or you can have traveling in pairs. That's also based on different price ranges as well. One-on-one is usually 150 per hour, depending on the dose. I have a breakdown of that as well. So if you are interested in that, you can let me know. There's the Rewired and Rising. This is for microdosing for those who want to just start with microdosing, or they want to tack on microdosing after the ceremony to really keep that serotonin up, especially if you're weaning off any kind of medicines. Then people like to incorporate the Rewired and Rising program, which is launching January 26th in the middle of January. I'll have a date that I'm going to be emailing out. Applications are open if you do want to go deeper. We've covered a lot, y'all. I'm going to shut this off here so I can see all your faces and answer any of your questions. So we went through the transformation, healing lens, medicine wheel, studies, indigenous wisdom, what psychedelics are, how they work with neuroscience in your body, toxicity, contraindications, set setting matrix, ceremony day. Ah. Okay, here we are. So I know that's a lot. You can move your bodies. We do learn through movement. If you have to rewatch this, I can also send it to you. I know it's a lot of information. I would love to open the space for any questions, any comments, any fears that come up, any cute stories that you want to share. Please, the floor is yours.
There's one in the chat. Do you want me to read it to you?
Yeah, sure. Thanks.
For someone who never had experienced any type of mushroom or drugs in general, is it safe to start, or should we start with microdosing first?
That's a great question. I would say there's no right or wrong answer. It's really to the preference that you. I have so many newbies that have never done microdosing and just come straight for the ceremony and have their own really evolved experience. And then later actually say, hey, I want to microdose because I want to actually utilize this consciousness and work with this deeper. I oftentimes have people coming again and again. I typically start new people off at a lower dose for comfort reasons, between a gram to 1.5 grams. With that, we're doing breath work. It's not so colorful and really expanded like 2 to 3 grams is, but it's still, you're still going to feel it. But it's it's much more gentle. Like I had first time women that were like, oh, I should have went deeper, because then they realized they're like, oh, okay, I totally could have went deeper there. So does that answer your question, Sarah?
That's really helpful. Yes, that was really helpful. Just getting a little bit of a sense.
Yeah, thanks for asking that because that's definitely a common question that comes up for sure. Anybody else?
What about spiritual emergency
What about
in
spiritual
ceremony?
I've never personally seen anybody go through spiritual emergency with mushrooms per se. Ayahuasca, I had my own spiritual emergency through ayahuasca. I had multiple ceremonies back to back. It was my first time really doing any of this deeper work. And it did spiral me out. And there was no integration. My shaman's like, oh, you'll get through it. I had zero integration. This is why I am a psychedelic integration coach. I specialize in integration so that we can work through whatever is coming up for you. There will be things that come up, and it may not come up in ceremony. It might come up days or weeks after ceremony, right? But for a spiritual emergency to happen, that means you're not integrating. You're not having a space to be held for you, to be heard and witnessed in what you just experienced. So then you stay looping. And then when you're looping, you're actually hardwiring the looping and the fear. And that's what spiritual emergency is, right? So there's also the South American medicine wheel, and they often call that the jaguar phase, when you get stuck in the dark part of the medicine wheel, and that's like you're consistently just ruminating on death or this fear of death. I would equate that to the lack of integration. It doesn't mean everything you see in a medicine ceremony is going to be butterflies. Absolutely not. We have shadow. And it's really cute to think that we should be just like these ultralight beings. We are, but we also have to integrate the shadow.
My other question is just about the amplifier. So is it safe to say that if you already struggle with anxiety, is it going to amplify the anxiety? Or with depression, would it take you lower?
Great question. So yes and no. This is why it's the state that you're entering the medicine ceremony with, right? If you're someone who's anxious and you take a microdose, it could amplify your anxiety, which is telling you to sit with the root of the anxiety. This is why even in microdosing, we want to work with how to set up I talk about creating a ritual. It's not just about popping another pill and I've got to go to work and have my coffee. A lot of people can't microdose and drink coffee because coffee already can cause anxiety, right? And if we're not learning how to navigate our nervous system, then yes, it can. But Stan Grof, he kind of coined that in the beginning of his work, that it is a non-specific amplifier, especially when you're working with DMT, right? DMT is very deep, right? I'll give you my example. I had experienced sexual trauma that I had no idea. I completely blocked it out as a child. It happened when I was 5 or 6, which is creepy. And I'm not saying this is going to happen for everyone, but because I was specifically asking Madre for why am I not able to connect deeper and go deeper into intimacy with people I love, that memory surfaced. It was a non-specific amplifier to that, whoa, that blocked intimacy of self, my connection to self. And it was all this child in her body, not safe, blocking everything out. You're not safe, was in that survival, right? So that was brought to surface. Is that a bad thing? No, it freed me from it, right? It freed me from it. And we shouldn't fear it either, right? In my space holding, I'm very empowering to hold the space for people. Even if there is darkness that comes out, let's unfold it and let's have the forgiveness practice and let's move through it. The last thing we want to do is ruminate and hold on to the toxicity of it. I hope that resonates for anyone. That shouldn't stop you from experiencing medicine just because it might amplify something. We want things to come that we've been hiding and suppressing, because otherwise it's going to eat at our bodies, and we don't need more dis-ease, right? We have enough dis-ease and disfulfillment. So that's why it's really allowing that opening. Is there any questions around actual ceremony date? I can talk more about dosing or send you. I have also like a little clip of the dosing if you want to look at a dosing chart. That's also cool to understand if you haven't been exposed to this. But I hope that I've covered at least neuroscience so that people kind of understand what this can support and where it could fit into our life. Go ahead, Sonia.
Always.
Evening ceremonies are also really beautiful, though. I have to say I really enjoy evening ceremonies because there is something out when it's like dark outside and we're kind of like nesting in this beautiful place. But for the first time, I usually do a daytime. I usually start around 10 or 11 a.m. and you're here for 4 to 7 hours, depending on the dosage. And it's also customizable if you're someone who wants to journey solo, then we can customize the plan for you. I can do either daytime or evening ceremonies. I've done both. Group ones are usually in the day for sure, but if someone's doing solo or a small group, then they can decide what they'd like to do.